The purpose of this video is to demonstrate for faculty how to set the dates on a PAWS quiz. So I have PAWS open and I have one of my courses open, and this happens to be a master copy for one of my hybrid classes. You can set the due dates in your master copies, and that way when they are cloned the dates will be there, so that's kind of neat. I am interested in setting the dates on a quiz, so I'm going to go to Assessment and then Quizzes. I have a couple quizzes here, and I'm going to focus on this first one. And a nice thing here is that you can already see that this quiz has dates on it, and the students would be able to see that as well. So for example, if we change to the student view, what the student would see is when the quiz opens and when it closes. An interesting point here is that students also very commonly use a calendar that is built into PAWS, and if you set a start date and an ending date, it will show that on the calendar, and so students tend to like that. I'm going to go back to the faculty view. So as faculty, I'm going to click on Assessment, I'm clicking on Quizzes, and I'm going to edit the quiz. So I'm going to click on this little arrow and edit. When I first come into the quiz, I'm on the Properties tab. I'm going to click the Restrictions tab. Restrictions. The information you need is really here at the top, and let me just point out a couple things. By default, when you create a new quiz or a new assignment, PAWS hides it. I don't know why, but it does. So make sure that box is not selected. Next, you're going to see the due date box, and it's very tempting to rush in and set this due date. The purpose of this box is confusing when you compare it to end date, but and honestly, I have to look this up every time just to make sure. Okay, sorry, I don't know why that took off there. The due date will basically alert the student that the quiz is due, but it will not deny access to the student. So as you can imagine, if you had a test, you would not want the student to be able to go into this quiz after you've reviewed it with the entire class and then take the quiz. So due date can be a little bit tricky. As you can see, the dates that I use are the start date and end date. When you put a value in the end date, that means that after that date, so in other words the day after the 30th, the quiz will no longer be open to students to be able to take it. Now sometimes I put the same date. I could, just to be 100% sure, I could put the due date of the 30th in as well. I could put both of those, just make them equal if I just wanted to avoid confusion. That's entirely up to you. I'm going to uncheck that. I use the start date, and I tend to start things at 12. A lot of times I'll say do 12:01 a.m. so the student understands it's the morning, it's as soon as it turns morning. And oftentimes I will put 11:55 p.m. so that the student understands, whether we're talking about midnight. Sometimes when you're working at midnight, it gets confused. Is it 12 noon? Is 12 p.m. noon? So a lot of times if you'll say 10:30 at night, 11:30 at night, then it becomes more understandable that it's not the afternoon. So that's just a tip. Finally, I always select this Display in Calendar checkbox. When you have a start date and end date on the assignment, it allows PAWS or D2L to easily display this assignment in the D2L calendar, and students do like that. They oftentimes use that as a reference, so I like to check that Display in Calendar. Now that's all you need. You could save and close at this particular point. If we scroll down here, you have a couple other options. If you this is just a practice activity that I make available to my students, but if you wanted to give it 90 minutes, that's, again, this is still under the restrictions tab. So I edit the quiz, and under restrictions, as you scroll down, you can put a password on it. I do find that passwords can be useful if you are giving only one attempt, because sometimes a student will click to open the test just to look at it because they think, well, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll actually work on it tomorrow. But if you have a timer on it, their time would be used up because the clock never stops. So anyway, so if they put in the password, then they intended to begin the test. But that's up to you. So you can put a password or not. In terms of the timing, you can put how long you want the time to be. If you enforce the time limit, which if I really was concerned about this time, I would enforce it. I might say I'm going to enforce this time. I'm going to give the students 30 minutes to complete this. At 5 minutes, they're going to be notified that they're exceeding the time. Now look at the options here. Once the time has expired, do I want them to be able to continue working? In other words, the system makes note that it was late, but they get to finish the quiz. Or do I lock the quiz, which in other words prevent the student from making further changes? What that's going to do is it's in essence going to freeze that quiz where they are on their screen. Or do I want to allow the student to continue working but automatically score the attempt as 0 after an extended deadline? Okay, so that's kind of self-explanatory. They're gonna keep on working thinking they're doing it. I think what that would allow you to do is perhaps then go in and look at their results and decide if you wanted to award points. Typically what I do, if I am going to if I'm going to set a time limit, I enforce it. I might put a 2-minute flag, whatever you feel, 5 minutes, whatever, 2 minutes. It depends on how long. If I do a 90-minute test, I tend to have a 5-minute grace period. If I do 120 minutes, I might give them even a little bit longer, if it's a big final exam. So time limit, at what point will it be flagged as exceeding the time? And then I prevent the student from making any further changes after that time. Okay, let me again just very quickly recap. We edited the quiz. We went to the restrictions tab. We made sure it's not hidden. I tend to not use the due date. I use the start and end dates and times. I display in calendar. You can choose to put a password. You can enforce the time limit. You decide on the time and how much extra grace period they have. You can then lock the screen so they cannot make any further changes after that time, or select one of the other options. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is special access. If you have a student who has a disability letter and they are allowed, for example, time and a half, then you would need to give that student additional time. Instead of 30 minutes, maybe they need 45 minutes, depending on what the letter says. Maybe they need 60 minutes, I don't know. Okay, so here are my options. Allow selected users special access to this quiz. Allow only users with special access to see this quiz. I leave this first option, okay? Otherwise it would be invisible. Then you're going to click on Add Users to Special Access. Now this screen looks a little similar, but you are only controlling special access now. So if I knew I had an athlete who could not finish that quiz on the 30th, he or she was not going to be able to complete that quiz until Friday. This special access is only going to apply to the people that I designate. Okay? You can see, enforce the time limits. You can look at some of your options, but what you would now see is all the students in your class. And if this particular student, Z. McGrory, had a disability letter, had special access, I would check this box in order to allow them additional time. So maybe I'm not going to enforce, or not going to change the time limits. But if I'm going to enforce a time limit and they got time and a half, I could change that to 45 minutes. Maybe instead of I'm going to assign an alternate grace period, and just in case something goes wrong, I'm going to go ahead and give this person maybe 15 extra minutes. So in other words, I'm giving them double time. Okay. I can change, this has changed a little bit since last time I've looked at this, but assign an alternate behavior for exceeding the time. Well, I still want the student to be prevented from making further changes. Okay. I typically give unlimited attempts, but if you only had one attempt, maybe for this particular student you want to give 2 attempts, 3 attempts, whatever the case is. Now that I've selected this student, I'm going to add that special access. So let's review. We came into the quiz, we changed to the restrictions tab, we made sure it's not hidden, we're not worried about the due date, this is basically just an alert. We set a start date, we set an end date, we displayed it in the calendar, we enforced a time limit of 30 minutes with a 2-minute grace period in case they go over. Once they go over, they will be prevented from making further changes. And we have one student with special access that we went to by clicking Add Users to Special Access. And we can see here what that special access is. They have 45 minutes. The time limit is enforced. Little icons here, their grace period. If you can see this on the video, under my arrow it says grace period is 15 minutes. And I can see they have the same start date, but maybe they had to schedule with the testing center, so I actually gave them a few extra days here till December 3rd. So what I would do now is I would save that. In this case, this was just an example, so I'm going to cancel. Whatever settings you have should appear here, available, and it tells me right there. And that's all there is to it. At its most basic level, you're just going to go to the quiz, you're going to edit, you're going to change to the restrictions tab, and you're just going to put in start date, end date, and I highly encourage displaying calendar. So that's it, and thank you very much.